Hey there, Taylor Elwood here, and today I thought I would talk about how to work through shame and humiliation. A friend of mine had recently asked me, how do you work through these emotions? What do you do? And believe me, I have a lot of experience working through those emotions because, they're part of the human experience. I think the first thing that I'm going to say about shame and humiliation is that it's really important to become comfortable with the fact that you feel shame and humiliation. And you might say, comfortable? What do you mean? Well, here's the thing. We all feel shame and humiliation. We all feel moments of embarrassment. We all feel moments of shame and humiliation. And we have to learn how to accept that we're going to feel them. Yes, they're unpleasant emotions. Yes, it doesn't feel good at that time. But if we can be comfortable feeling that way, if we can accept that this is a normal human feeling to have, then at least we can start to work through it. A lot of times what happens is when people feel shame and humiliation, they shut down. They stop themselves from feeling. They get all clenched up because they don't want to deal with it. And it's because when you're feeling shame and humiliation, you are vulnerable. You are facing yourself in a really intimate way, and you might be even facing yourself in an intimate way. You may have other people facing you at the same time in a very intimate way. Shame and humiliation is not easy to sit with as a result. Because the fact of the matter is, if I'm feeling shame and humiliation and I'm sharing this with you, I'm being vulnerable. I'm showing you the not so nice parts of myself. I'm bearing myself to the world. And if even if you're not sharing that with anyone else, even if you're just sharing it with yourself, it's uncomfortable because let's be honest, we don't like to face the parts of ourselves that we don't care for. And shame and humiliation is an embodiment of that. Nonetheless, this is part of the human experience. I don't know anyone in my life who's not felt shame and humiliation, and I've certainly felt shame and humiliation a number of times in my life. I want to take a moment and define what shame slash humiliation is and compare it to guilt. And I do this partially off the basis of having read this amazing person's books called Brené Brown, which I'm going to point you to some resources for her as well because she's really useful to read. Um, the difference between shame and guilt is this: with guilt, you recognize that something you did was bad. Like, okay, like I dropped the vase. That was a bad thing for me to do. Okay, that's an example of guilt. I feel guilty about it afterwards because, so and so really loved that vase, and I feel bad that I dropped it. Now, that's guilt. So shame is something a little bit different. Shame is, I feel like I'm a bad person. I dropped that vase and I am a horrible, horrible person. I don't deserve to live. Blah 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 blah, right? Shame shame is that feeling where basically you see yourself as bad. And there's an interesting distinction with guilt and shame because when you feel that you are bad, when you feel a sense of shame, people tend to internalize that. They don't necessarily deal with it. When you feel guilty about something, you might focus on, okay, well, maybe I can glue that vase together. Maybe I can get so and so a new vase. Maybe I can apologize and try and demonstrate some way that I understand and recognize that what I did was bad, but I know I'm not a bad person. Whereas shame is just, I'm a bad person. And it's an important distinction because we all feel guilt at some time or another too. The difference is that when you feel shame, you don't necessarily engage with people. Like if you've ever been in a fight with a loved one, and it's one of those cases where you got caught with your hand in the cookie jar, so to speak, right? We've all had that moment where we got our hand caught in the cookie jar, and we did something, and we feel bad. People, when you feel that way, that's shame and humiliation, and that tends to be when people shut down and they don't engage with whoever they're with at that time. Instead, they're kind of, I feel horrible, I'm a bad person. And again, we've all had that experience. If you tell yourself you haven't had it, I'm gonna call you out on it and say you have, and I'm not doing it in a manner to shame you. It's just the simple truth. We all feel shame at one time or another. It's not a bad thing in and of itself. It's how we learn to deal with it. So I find that really a lot of shame is honestly rooted in experiences where we were told that we're bad, or where, the response was disproportionate to the action. So okay, I broke the vase and the person freaks out and gets angry and makes a big deal out of it for days and days and days. That's going to cause shame. Whereas, yes, the person might be understandably angry in the moment and might say, it really hurts my feelings that you broke this vase, but I understand that it was an accident and you're trying to do your best, so we'll figure out how to get past this. That's the difference right there. If someone's continually guilt tripping you, really they're shame tripping you. That's a different thing altogether. When someone's making you feel bad about yourself and about who you are, that's what creates that trauma around shame, and that's what makes it so difficult for people to sit with and work through shame. Because let's be honest, if we're told that we're bad people, right, what do? We turn that on ourselves. And again, as someone who has a ton of experience dealing with shame and humiliation in my life, yeah, you probably wouldn't think that of me, right? Yeah, well, Taylor, he's all so confident in everything else. No, trust me, I've had plenty of that I've had to work through. I can tell you that it really comes right down to, those experiences in your life where, people basically had a disproportionate response to what happened, and as a result chose to shame you. And then, you get to a point later in life where you're like, well, I just feel shame, or I feel like I'm a bad person, because and it's a defense mechanism in a lot of ways, because if we're so caught up in feeling bad, then we actually don't have to pay attention to what the other person is expressing, right? Later on in life, after you've had those initial moments of shame where someone shamed you, you kind of start to take over, and it's kind of a, well, if I show that I'm bad, maybe this person won't be so hard on me. At least that was my rationale for why I would be so hard on myself. The problem is that when shame is in that way, it gets in the way of genuine connection and resolution. How can you talk with somebody or work through things when you're feeling like you're a bad person? You can't. And as a result, you end up shutting that person out, but it becomes a defense mechanism that stops you from feeling vulnerable. I feel this shame and I'm feeling bad, and I don't have to face what this person has to say. Why do we do it? Because again, we might be afraid, or we may have other bad experiences. So the question then comes, well, how do we work through this, Taylor? What do we do? Well, there are a few resources that I'm going to point you to. First, I'm going to point you to the works of Brené Brown. I'm going to show you the book covers here, and the gift of imperfections, the gifts of imperfection, right? And braving the wilderness, and rising strong, and daring greatly, right? Yeah, I recommend reading her books, okay? And the reason why I recommend reading her books is because this is a person who has basically been an academic who has studied shame and humiliation and how it shows up. More importantly, she's studied how to become resilient when it comes to shame, how to work through shame, how to work through things that come up in your life. And yes, I realize it's a few books to read, but trust me on this, it will change your life. It changed my life. When I started reading these books and working through the things that were going on in my life in regards to shame, it really helped me to take a step back and start looking at my patterns, and it changed the way I communicate with my loved ones. I mean, I can literally say that my relationship with my wife improved by about 300% as a result of reading those books and implementing the strategies in those books, because it helped me to really start communicating proactively, and also recognizing when I was putting myself into a place of shame to avoid being vulnerable and intimate with her. And there's going to be those moments where you are vulnerable and intimate, where things are uncomfortable, and again, that's okay, as long as you learn how to deal with them. I'll admit, for me, one of the hardest things that I have when it comes to connecting with somebody is being able to open up and trusting them enough to tell them what I'm feeling, and being open enough to hear what they have to say. I have struggled with that for a good part of my life. And it's because of experiences that I had when I was young. You know, I had a stepmom who who did a real number on me. And that wasn't helped also by other parental figures and other things that happened either. But you know, I've been able to work through a lot of it and work through subsequent things as well by taking the techniques in those books that I showed you and applying them in a way that makes me feel recognized by myself and by the person I'm talking with. And you have to recognize yourself first. You can't have somebody else recognize you without you recognizing you. So when I, you know, recognizing my shame and seeing the patterns that were coming up, it's like, oh, okay, that's me. I'm getting in the way of myself and I'm stopping myself from being able to work through X, Y, and Z. Well, if I'm having that come up, I need to be realistic and honest with myself and make some changes. And how do I do that? I implemented those strategies. That wasn't the only thing I used, though. I also used the Taoist water breathing meditation tactics shared in relaxing into your being, breathing chi, and dissolving the ego. That helped me work on the energetic and biological aspects of shame. You know, working through like how my body tenses up and locks up and things like that has been invaluable again for being present with the emotion. And of course, I'm going to plug my own book, Inner Alchemy, because hey, if I'm going to do this, why not? Right? Because Inner Alchemy is also based off of these practices and things that I've done to help me work through and dissolve those blockages. So I recommend that as well. Because if you're not engaged in some type of meditative practice where you're working through the emotional, spiritual, mental, and physical blockages that are in your life, what you're going to find is that it's very hard to live your life proactively. I mean, I see a lot of magicians, and I know it sounds harsh, but it's true. I see a lot of magicians who practice their magic reactively and live their lives reactively. Why? I mean, honestly, if we're practicing magic, should we not be better? Well, I think we should be. And I think the way that we do that is we learn to be proactive in how we work through things like shame and humiliation in our lives. We engage in a meditation practice, for example, not with the purpose of clearing our mind and being all om. I mean, great if you want to do that, but with the purpose of really being present and working through whatever is blocking you, whatever is coming up in your body, whatever is coming up in your emotions, etc., and proactively dissolving and releasing that. Because when we proactively dissolve and release, relax and let go, then we become present with the things that cause us to react. And when you understand what your emotional triggers and mental triggers and all that are, then you can undo them, and then you can start to make changes in your life in terms of how you communicate, how you behave, etc., etc. And you find that your life gets a lot easier. And big surprise here, you also find that with your magic that you tend to instead of trying to force things to change, you tend to flow into alignment with the change and make things happen a lot easier. And again, having done both routes, having done magic where it's like, okay, I'm going to try and force the momentum of the universe into my favor and make things happen. And yes, I've been able to do that. Great. Good on me. But being able to flow into the change and to take the eros, and I use that term very purposely. I'm not referring to the God eros. I'm referring to the fundamental principle of movement that is at the core of everything. Being able to tap into that eros and allow it to fundamentally move you toward what you want to achieve is a lot easier. And again, this is something that a lot of magicians don't know how to do. And the reason they don't know how to do it is because the way we're typically taught magic is very reactive. Okay, I got a problem, go use magic to solve that problem and force the universe. Great. Good on you. But have you dealt with the core of the problem? Well, the core of the problem is you. You look at every problem in your life, there is one thing it has in common, and that's you. And I'm not saying that to shame you. I'm saying that because if you want to work through the problems that come up in your life, you have to recognize your own role in them. And when you start to do this kind of work, whether it's working through shame or humiliation or anything else, what you find is that the problems in your life significantly begin to decrease. They go on a little curve, and your life becomes easier to live. The drama goes down. And as a result, you're able to focus on more important things, such as your spiritual path and your life purpose and things like that. And I know that probably sounds very new agey, but trust me on this. A person is much happier in their life when they are focused on what really matters to them, as opposed to just going through life and waiting for something to hit you on the way. And I will say, I don't have this down to a T. I'm still working through things. I mean, I'm 42 years old. I still have plenty of stuff that I'm working through in my life when it comes to this kind of work. But I can tell you that when I look at where I was in my 20s and my 30s, and I look at where I'm now, I see this steadily decreasing thing. I started this meditation practice that I do back in 2004. It's 2019 now, so 15 years ago. I see this steadily decreasing surge of drama. Things get easier and easier. Life gets easier and easier. And I think as magicians, that's something that we should focus on. Make our lives as easy as possible so we can focus on what really matters, because that's why we're here. We're not here to have drama-laden lives. I mean, if that's your thing and that's what gets you off, go for it. But I don't recommend it. So when it comes to shame and humiliation, I want you to do a few things. I want you to be gentle with yourself and acknowledge that it's okay to feel shame and humiliation. It is. It's a part of human life. I want you to recognize that feeling that you are a bad person is just a result of things that happen to you and that you internalized, and that along the way, yes, maybe you started doing to yourself as a way to protect yourself. Because if you can recognize that, then you can start to shift your perspective on it and start to change it. And again, I would recommend checking out the books that I showed earlier in the video. They can be very helpful to you. They will make a difference in your life. And again, trust me on that. I will leave a comment with links to those videos below in the video. But trust me on this, it does make a huge difference in your life. You will be happier for it by taking the time to work through those books and working through the processes that come up. Okay, so that's it. Thanks for those of you who watched live, and for those, if you have any questions or things like that, feel free to comment below, and take care and have a great day.